everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast, where I'm rain, shine, or anything in between. We're going to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Balthazar.
And ladies and gentlemen, the long wait is over. Football season is just around the corner. The day that we're recording this, we are 5 days out from the Cats playing in Ireland. And, you know, it's felt like it's been a shorter offseason, but that doesn't mean that it didn't feel long, especially when, you know, the June and July doldrums hit. But we're here, and the first game of the year is a bit of an odd one in Ireland. Farmageddon conference matchup for your opener of the year. So conference opener, season opener in a completely different country up against one of the biggest rivals that K-State has in the Iowa State Cyclones. So a lot of circumstances, a lot of excitement going into this game for both teams. So before we even dive into the game itself, I just kind of want to talk about the game generally, because I do think that the vibes of this game, the losing team will kind of feel like their season is over for the rest of the week.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, what you said earlier, this was a shorter off season. It was 1 week shorter for us at least. But no, I think you're right. I think I'll be very, very, very happy if we win this game, like over the moon. Because I mean, starting the year 1-0, just in general, but also in conference play is going to be huge. But I think I dread the fallout of losing more than I do the joy of winning. Because if we lose this game, it's going to be really rough. I mean, that's not insurmountable, like realistically, but starting the year with a loss to your rival in a game that would have been a home game, but we took the money to move it overseas. That'll really, I think, put a dark rain cloud over the rest of the regular season, at least for a while, unless we really start winning again. But I do think that regardless, this should be a really great game. And it's easy to forget that, you know, there's only one thing between K-State and its most recent game against Iowa State, and that is the Rate Bowl. So we're playing them twice in three games, back-to-back regular season games as well. So it's kind of weird that we're seeing them a lot right now, it feels like. But I guess it's kind of like TCU in basketball, where I felt like we were playing them like 3 times a year there for a while.
Yeah, I remember the years where the TCU K-State like rivalry was so strong because they played each other in everything so often. But last year's game, you mentioned it, K-State ended up falling in Ames 29-21 in a game that felt a lot worse than that score, mostly because it was just a maddening game where Iowa State led from wire to wire. And there were a few big-time K-State mistakes. I'm thinking of the Avery Johnson rollout for a safety, even though it didn't ultimately end up mattering because we didn't score in the fourth quarter anyway. Jack Fabris being put on Jaden Higgins, which I don't blame Jack Fabris for that, but I mean, good Lord, he should never have been put in that position. And just a few mistakes where it seemed like K-State was beating themselves and Iowa State was trying equally hard to do so, but Iowa State ended up prevailing. So I imagine that left quite a sour taste in the mouth of K-State, the team, because I know that I hated watching that game. But I do think that watching that game as teaching tape would be useful. So, you know, now we can just sort of dive into Iowa State, the team, starting with their offense. So, Connor, you can sort of take the first bullet point here, and then I can sort of elaborate as we go bullet point by bullet point.
Yeah. So if we're going based off of last year, they're going to try and stress the communication of the defense by using a lot of motion. But notably the full formation motion, where almost every skill player is on the move. They did this to try and force defenses into making mental or communication errors, and it was fairly effective uh, with the players that they had. Really, they just want to get everybody moving to try and make it more difficult to figure out where the ball's going. Kind of KU does a lot of this. They did even more of it when they still had Andy Katelmcgee as their OC. But that's maybe something to keep an eye on this first game. If you've seen the depth chart that came out, Gunnar Maldonado's not on that. And that's somebody I think a lot of people are looking towards to kind of be the guy that gets everyone in position this season. Kleinman mentioned in his presser that he might play, he might not. So that communication and a lot of motion, something to maybe think about going into the game.
Yeah, and a big part of K-State's defense is sort of how they're able to disguise coverages. Because I'm specifically thinking they run a cover 2 invert where one of the corners is dropping back and playing the deep half instead of a safety, which is what you traditionally see. Whenever you have full formation motions, it becomes increasingly difficult for teams to run those disguises because you have to communicate a different way to disguise the exact same coverage, and you have to do it so quickly as the team is motioning. So it makes it extremely difficult to disguise any kind of coverage up against an offense that is so willing to motion the entire formation for it. So not only does it require near perfect communication, but you can't really disguise coverages and you can't hide the ball of what you're doing. So that's why it was so easy for Rocco Becht last year to find one-on-one matchups because, I mean, once you motion everyone out or you motion everyone in, the ball has been shown. You can't hide it anymore. So it becomes really obvious where, when you're given the play calls, like, okay, this is where I need to go. It's what you normally do with a motion offense on steroids. The only disadvantage is everyone has to get set. So you do get that extra second or two if you have an elite communicator to get yourself into position. You don't have time to call a full disguise, but you may have time to say, okay, we'll wipe this when we'll go from, a cover 0 blitz to maybe we'll just run a traditional Tampa 2. So this is an offense that I don't like seeing in the first week of a potential scheme change at defense. Don't like that. But I think it's possible that K-State is able to adjust and overcome it.
Yeah, and I think having a great defensive front may help with that, particularly at the quarterback like Rocco Becht, which we'll get into plenty of times in this episode. But are we alternating here?
No, you can just take the bullet points and I can elaborate.
Gotcha. Then the biggest problem for Iowa State's offense this year is going to be the complete lack of major returning production. I mean, they have Rocco Becht back, and they have Carson Hand back and Abu Sama back, but the passing game is really where Iowa State was at its best last year. And the only receiving option from last year still on the roster who had more than 12 catches is tight end Gabe Burkle. So when looking at yards, over 68% of Rocco Becht's passing yards and passing touchdowns not returning from last year. And that it hurts when you are going to go from 2 NFL draft picks and Jaden Higgins and Jalen Knoll to losing them because they were game breakers for Iowa State last year.
Yeah, 2 top 100 picks. Losing that is going to hurt any offense. There's no disputing that. But losing them from this particular offense when they relied on them winning one-on-one matchups so much, I mean, in a way, they kind of schemed their entire offense around Rocco Becht and Jaden Higgins and Jalen Knoll. So they're going to have to either find a different guy, which they got 2 portal guys we'll talk about later, or find a way to completely revamp their offense. I mean, 68% of both yards and touchdowns. That's a lot, especially when the rest of the receiving yards pretty much came from tight ends and running backs on checkdowns. So that is the biggest question mark for Iowa State. If they're able to even replicate half of what 2 top 100 picks have done, personally, everyone else may as well just quit because because Iowa State is just wide receiver U of the Midwest. We'll say the true Midwest because I think Ohio State still probably holds that true title. But it all comes down to how much can they replace Jaden Higgins and Jalen Knoll, specifically when it comes to Rocco Beck's production.
Yeah, but speaking of returning production, they do get some of that back in their offensive line. They retain a group that had a lot of snaps last year, minus their left tackle. But despite that, last year they did really struggle with run blocking. Their rushing attack last year was not super effective or consistent for the most part. They were very much a passing team.
Yeah, they're the highest run blocking grade per PFF of their starting offensive line was a 64.4, which is slightly above average. Everyone else was below average. And it's very strange that that's how that worked out. But again, it stressed the same offense that they run also sometimes puts stress on the offensive line because the defense is going to move. And then you say, oh, wait a minute, is this my guy? Is this my guy? So you're getting a lot more, I'm not going to say whiffed blocks because weirdly enough, they didn't whiff on a lot of blocks. They were very good in that department, but it is that second and that maybe half second of hesitation. But returning an offensive line with experience, you're never going to complain about that as a play caller.
No, definitely not. But with that being said, they did land 2 of the top receiving options from the portal. Chase Soule is a 6'4 receiver who was at Colorado, most recently at East Carolina. And Xavier Townsend, a 5'11 receiver from UCF. Their stats not super flashy on paper. Neither of them surpassed 700 yards. A lot of that was a product of their offensive scheme at their previous destination.
Yeah, I mean, Chase Soule, he was rated very highly last season, 34 catches, 678 yards, 3 touchdowns. Not a lot of touchdowns, but definitely a big play threat and a very big frame. And Xavier Townsend, I remember him being one of the guys that I was watching when K-State played UCF in 2023. That was his last productive season, 33 catches, 325 yards, 3 touchdowns. So on paper, again, neither of these guys look particularly flashy, but one of them is listed on the one line. I believe it's Soule is listed on the one line as a starting receiver for them. And then Townsend is listed as one of the options for starting slot guy. So they're not going to be Jalen Knoll and Jaden Higgins, and you're going to get tired of us saying that no one is going to replicate those guys, but they still have receiving talent on the roster. It's just a matter of, do they get to that level of chemistry quick enough for this game in particular? Because after this game, they can have all the chemistry they want. I don't care. But now it's my problem. So they're not going to be able to replace it, but they may, if they're able to get 60% of it, it's enough to make their passing game threatening.
Right. But on their passing game, they're still going to likely go over the middle quite a bit. Rocco Beck prefers that. That is better there. He really only gets aggressive on the outside to challenge a one-on-one. As this offense, they want the ball out pretty quickly in the passing game, which is funny because, I mean, their offense, it's not conducive to a fast pace because of how much they use motion. But regardless, they still prefer to get the ball out quickly, and Rocco Beck is a much better quarterback getting the ball out quickly.
Yeah, and a big part of his game last year was that aggressiveness. Over 13% of his passes were deep balls. That is insane for a quarterback to have. And you look at his spray chart, and it's relatively well distributed. But where he struggles most is, weirdly enough, in the short passing game. And I know that this is the virtue of, short passing versus medium passing, but if you look at his turnover worthy throw percentage, I mean, it's not great. He had no short big time throws, which again, fine, but over 5% of his short passing attempts were turnover worthy. So that's a very high percentage. And honestly, I can think of examples where there probably should have been more counted against him in the turnover worthy throw percentage. In a lot of ways, we'll talk about Rocco Becht specifically, but in the passing game, it was a lot of, take your aggressive shots whenever you see those one-on-ones, which, yeah, if I had 2 top 100 receivers, that would be my offensive strategy too. But it'll be interesting to see how they sort of adjust to that, because Rocco Becht, I didn't write it down, one of his biggest strengths is the deep ball, because he has probably a top 2 or 3 deep ball in the Big 12. That's his biggest strength. But if they're able to uncork that, that'll be very, very interesting to see. But you also have their running game, which is one of the running games ever.
Yeah, it wasn't spectacular last year by any stretch of the imagination. Carson Hansen led them with 750 yards. He kind of had it was kind of like James Gilbert level numbers for K-State back in 2019, just with more touchdowns. It was really what he did. Busama wasn't spectacular either. He was fine. He had just under 600 yards, but yeah, it's not spectacular, but it can be effective with the zone counter game, regardless. So it's not unusable, but last year at least, they were definitely a pass first team.
Yeah, which is very funny, because if you look at their run pass splits, you wouldn't think that, because they ran the ball a little more than they threw it. But it's just that the passing game was so much more effective that it doesn't matter. But there's nothing really left to say about their offensive philosophy and their offensive scheming. So we decided to pick out, on each side of the ball, 3 main players to note. And of course, the first player on the offensive side of the ball will almost always be, I'm not going to say always, but will almost always be the quarterback, and that is Rocco Becht for Iowa State.
Yeah. When he's on, he's probably top half of the conference QB. And he's won a lot of games for Iowa State recently, more than most. And he's got a really great arm and decent mobility. He ran the ball almost 100 times last year. Granted, he only averaged 3.2, and that does include sacks, but that's plenty of runs and scrambles there. However, where he's going to struggle is going to be the finesse of playing quarterback, both in terms of accuracy and decision-making. He's not a very accurate quarterback, and at times he actively makes life harder for his receivers because of this. He had a completion percentage of 59% last year, and that's with 2 top 100 NFL draft picks on his roster that he threw to a lot last year. So it probably should have been a little lower as well. But one of the main reasons he's so inaccurate is because he's not great at taking speed off of the ball. He's pretty much always throwing the fastball, which, is a useful tool to have. But as a quarterback, there's plenty of situations where you need to have a little bit more touch. And so that's not always going to be the best option for you. Like last year against K-State, K-State was a defense that really struggled with the big play in the passing game. He had a 37% completion percentage. And this is a K-State defense that gave up, I think, like 80 to 85% completion against Shedeur Sanders in Colorado, which granted Shedeur Sanders and that whole offense was kind of designed for him to get a lot of like open looks. But still, I mean, this is not a K-State defense in the passing game that was great at preventing big plays. But adjusted metrics and advanced analytics don't help him much either on his performance. But leads to another major issue with Rocco Becht, which is that when he's playing in structure, he's a top 4 quarterback in the Big 12. But when he has to think or hold on to the ball past his first read, he really is prone to overthinking, and his mechanics will start to fall apart. He really falls off on his throws or will look to scramble even when in a clean pocket. His saving grace is that he can make plays out of structure on the run, but he's not good enough at it to make it his calling card. So it's another major issue with Rocco Becht.
Yeah, and I mentioned turnover-worthy throws earlier, and a lot of those do come on those second reads where he really is. You will get 2 or 3 different Rocco Bechts in the course of the same game. You'll get the Rocco Becht under pressure, who is a below-average passer. PFF rates him at a 55 in his passer rating with a 41% adjusted completion percentage, which stinky bad poo-poo. And then you get the Rocco Becht that plays in structure and hits his read exactly when it needs to come open. So you're going to see the 2 different Rocco Bechts, but the trick with him is to get him thinking. Because once things start going really, really well and he gets on that ball and gets into a rhythm, he's very, very difficult to stop because he just accrues confidence. But if you get him to think, if you get him to take an extra step or take an extra hitch, he's going to make mistakes, or he's just going to have a really poor completion percentage, because a lot of his overthrows actually end up being dirt balls, which is really weird because normally you expect a guy like him with such a big arm to be really subject to overthrows. I would also like to mention he should have thrown like 4 picks against K-State last year. 3 of them ended up being dropped. But Rocco Becht, as much as I like to dumpster on him for kind of looking like the caveman from the old Geico ads, he's a perfectly fine quarterback, and he can be a really good one. But a lot of that you have to question is, okay, how good can he be with receivers who aren't going to probably tear it up in the NFL as well? But he has 2 other complementary pieces as well that are worth mentioning. But again, neither of them compare to what he had last year.
Yeah, so that takes us into the next notable offensive player that we have to go over, and that's Carson Hansen, running back. He led them in rushing last year. We mentioned him a bit already, but he's primarily a power back who has a decent jab step and can make cuts on inside running plays. But his best calling card is run after contact. He had 739 rushing yards last season, on a whopping 485 of those yards were after contact. So he just really does not go down on the first hit. So what he lacks in long speed and open field ability, he makes up for that, getting some very dirty yards and punishing defenses who aren't tackling him low.
Yeah, him and we chose to mention him over Abu Sama. I'm not going to lie to you, some of it is salt, but Abu Sama is the better open field back of the 2. That doesn't mean that he's great, but Carson Hansen was the leading rusher on this team for a reason, because he was able to, in a way, compensate for an offensive line that wasn't very good, just because they could afford to have a guy get only slightly blocked because of Carson Hansen's contact balance and his ability to get past guys who aren't tackling him either head on. And he's good at forcing sort of off-angle tackles as well, or guys that aren't tackling him low. So Carson Hansen is, of the backs on this team, the one that concerns me the most, just because it requires really, really sound tackling, that there are exactly 2 people on the roster that I have consistent confidence in doing that on a down basis, that being Austin Romaine and VJ Payne, who, if I'm remembering correctly, actually leveled Carson Hansen last year in the Iowa State game. It was either VJ either leveled him or leveled Abu Sama. I don't remember which.
Yeah, I can't remember who either, but it's a highlight I've been seeing quite a bit recently. in the promotion for the game.
Yeah. So Carson Hansen, he is diet Cam Scattaboo. Yes, it is because he's a white power back. So the next one is the best returning receiving option for them, but even then,
Yeah, that's the tight end, Gabe Burkle. He's of the group the best receiving tight end, and he's the only returning receiver from last year who caught more than 12 passes. He's got really great size, though. He's got a 6'6" frame that kind of lets him play sort of like a post player almost. He didn't get a lot of receptions last year, but he has the potential to really be an effective, scary weapon because he did have pretty good averages last year, 11.4 yards per catch, only one touchdown. But again, Higgins and Knoll were really taking the majority of the touchdowns out of that receiving room. I mean, those two combined for 17 receiving touchdowns. The rest of the team at 8. They knew who their two best options were last year.
Yeah, and who can blame them for that? But Burkle, he's someone that scares me a little more just because of what he could be, because he moves pretty well for that 6'6" frame. He's not the route runner of previous Iowa State tight ends, thank God, but he does play. He is more than capable of playing bully ball and getting open, especially if they are running those two tight end sets where he is that second tight end, because he wasn't the tight end that got the most snaps on the team, but he was the one that scares me most in the receiving game. So all in all, there are a lot of questions with this offense just because they relied so much, and we've said it to the point where it's almost just words now rather than words with meaning, but they relied so much on two guys that aren't there anymore. So that's the biggest question mark, is how do they adjust? Like, do they keep the exact same offensive scheme with the full formation motions that will give more clear answers and give more clear one-on-ones? Or do they adjust to a more traditional offense that will maybe only have one guy motion? If I had to guess, I would say that they probably keep their same offensive scheme just because that's what Rocco Becht is most comfortable with. But it's hard to not project a decrease in total production, especially in the first game of the year in a different country trying to adjust to new receivers.
Yeah, so that wraps up the talk on the offensive players and the offense as a whole. So that can move us into their defense now. So Iowa State, they really popularized the 3-3 stack defense, particularly in the Big 12. Although they'll probably run a few variations on it this year compared to last year. It lets them clog pass lanes, and it keeps a player in space that can defend the outside running game a bit as well. I mean, this has become a popular defense. K-State has adopted it, and it's popular for a reason, the Big 12. It's effective against both the run and pass when played correctly with the proper personnel.
Yeah, and that's something that they've done very well, is keep the personnel, because when you have a properly constructed 3-3 stack, you have a defense that is almost always going to be more than the sum of its parts. And that is how I would describe Iowa State's defense for the past however long John Hancock has been there, is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah. Although the 3-3 look has been really popular, there are still some weaknesses. The biggest of it with their particular brand of the 3-3 stack is they trade their great ability to disguise coverage looks for a relative lack of ability to disguise run looks. You can really predict their rushing strategy and how many they're sending pretty early in the snap. So you aren't likely to be surprised by a blitz that they send, but they more than make up for this by doing a lot with how they flip their coverages to try and get the quarterback thinking just long enough to get them off the spot and force a mistake or a bad throw.
Yeah, and that is another staple of this team. I mean, they only had 16 sacks last year. they were not good at getting to the quarterback. But where they made up for it was they were very, very good at forcing turnovers. I mean, they had one fewer interception than they had sacks. They had 15 interceptions compared to 16 sacks. So they are going to invert. They're going to do all sorts of funky things with their coverage that's going to confuse the quarterback and make them think that they have less time than they actually do. Because this is not a defense that is particularly good at getting sacks, but it's very good at confusing people when you're in the passing game. It's why whenever you look at their stats last year, although it fell off towards the back end, they were the best in the conference against the pass, but the worst in the conference against the run. And it's not because the 3-3 is inherently bad against the run. That's a very tired and old narrative, but it's just the way that their defense is designed to play. They're going to do a lot of weird things with their corners, their safeties, even their linebackers. But you also generally know, okay, yeah, I'm blocking that guy. He's not going to move. Like there's going to be a bunch of tree stumps in front of you that you just have to outstrength. Very difficult, but not mentally taxing the way that their pass defense is.
Yeah, but getting into now some of their returning production on defense, they're doing a bit better here than they were on offense. Dominique Orange, nose tackle, if that name sounds familiar, that was a one-time K-State recruit. Jeremiah Cooper at safety, Jontez Williams at corner are all returning. But they did lose their tackling machines in Bo Freeler and Malik Verdon, Miles Purchase, and Darian Porter, and most of their sack production by losing their edge rushers, Joey Peterson and J.R. Singleton. So to replace that line production, they have a collection of transfer dart throws at the lower levels. They got a couple of FCS guys and Von Troy Malone from Tulsa.
And I think the two FCS guys are from Yale and UNI, or if I'm remembering correctly, and then Von Troy Malone. So they already weren't good at really getting after the quarterback or at least getting sacks. And they lost the people on their team that were best at doing that. But, I mean, they kept their leading interception getter, who genuinely terrifies me. And they kept one of their leading tacklers and most of their linebacker core, who we actually didn't see last year because their linebacking core was so decimated with injury towards the back end of last year. So it's a mixed bag of what they do and don't return. I think the best way that I would put it is they kept the parts of their defense that were generally the strongest, with the exception of tackles, but didn't really do much to shore up what was already a weakness. So it's probably just a lateral move from who they were last season on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, but some of the main keys to beating the defense can be boiled down to two things, which is don't get stubborn and take advantage of this defense over the middle. The defense, they're going to make very good, educated guesses on what you're going to run on offense. If they're guessing inside run, they're going to be pinching inside and clogging the gaps. So when they play the guessing game, you really need to go out of your way to punish them for it. Second, last year, Iowa State was very bad over the middle of the field and very bad covering slot guys toward the back end of the season. Jace had a huge game against them, and the entire Miami receiving core noticed their weaknesses in that part pretty early on. So they went into those games highly rated in pass defense, but those issues in particular really hurt them down the stretch.
Yeah, so, I mean, just try to take advantage of them over the middle. And K-State admittedly did that pretty well last year. I mean, it ultimately didn't end up mattering because it was written in the stars that we were going to lose that game. But Jace Brown and Garrett Oakley both had really good games. And a lot of people will point to, it was the linebacker depth. That's why the middle of the field was so open. Not really, no, because those weren't areas that linebackers are designed to go to in those coverages. I mean, maybe one or two catches, where a linebacker isn't getting proper depth, But even then, those weren't throws that were getting feathered over linebackers. There was just no one there. So those are the two areas that I think are probably the most important. There are going to be times where you're going to gain absolutely nothing. John Hickok is too good at guessing for that to not happen at least once. But when you get those opportunities, when you have them guessing wrong, you can't afford to miss, because they're very good at making you beat yourself. And if you don't take advantage of the 1 in 4 chance that you get to get the big play, the other 3 times you're either throwing your head up against the wall or throwing a pick. So you need to take advantage when they guess incorrectly on a play. And the group of skill talent that they have, or the returning production that they have, honestly does make that a little more difficult.
Yeah, and now we'll go over some of their most notable returners. Dominique Orange, nose tackle. Like a lot of nose tackles, he doesn't have phenomenal stats because those guys are just not box score guys. He only had 24 tackles, only 1 sack last year, despite playing in 13 of their 14 games. But that does not tell the full story of Dominique Orange, because it's maybe not an exaggeration to say that he might be the most important part of their defense, especially against the run. He's a tree stump that refuses to move and has a solid ability to push centers backwards just enough to make quarterbacks uncomfortable. So he may end up being the all Big 12 choice nose tackle at the end of this year, particularly for people who are watching his games consistently.
He just doesn't move in the running game. He reminds me a lot of Siaki Ika, except for he's significantly lighter than Siaki Ika was, because I think Ika was playing at 350. He plays consistently at 320, 325. But that does not discount his strength, because he is extremely strong, and he doesn't move. Like, you can hit him as much as you want. He's not moving. So most of the time, your true A-gap runs become so much more difficult because you're not getting any push against him. He's not someone that's going to light up the box score, and he's not someone who's going to make a bunch of splash plays in the same way that Siaki Ika wasn't. But they're both remarkably effective nose tackles because, damn it, they don't move.
Yeah, Dominique Orange, someone that, he can turn back the clock. I wish K-State would have been able to land him because he is from Kansas City, Missouri, native. But the next notable player we'll talk about is Jeremiah Cooper, strong safety. He's a top 4 returning tackler from last year for Iowa State and led the team in pass deflections as well. But his biggest strength is definitely his closing speed in the passing game. The downside of that being a strength is that it's really not as useful of a skill over the middle of the field. There were games where he was really consistently getting toasted over the middle because he'd overplay his hand and rely a bit too much on that closing speed. Still a really solid player. 8 pass deflections in the season's pretty good. But regardless, it's like that definitely helped contribute to their struggles defending the middle.
Reminds me a lot of Omar Daniels for K-State, except for as like a slot safety, which, I mean, say what you will about Omar Daniels. He was okay on the outside, except for when he was going up against Marvin Mims, but who can really blame him? But yeah, not good over the middle. I think he's a big reason why they struggled so much over that middle of the field area. But he just tackles. He just gets a lot of tackles, and he's really good at breaking towards specifically outside routes. He almost plays safety like a true outside corner, which there are 2 different positions for a reason, and that's why even teams in the NFL differentiate between, strong safety that plays in the box and nickel corner or slot corner. Those are 2 different positions. But he's still, that makeup speed is what makes him a good player who isn't the best idea to challenge, especially on outbreakers. But then here's the player that scares me most.
Yeah, and that takes us to Jontez Williams, corner. He was arguably Iowa State's best corner last year, and that was on a team that had a pretty high draft pick. He tallied 4 interceptions, and most of that came because of his great coverage instincts. He has an uncanny ability to feel where routes are going by looking at QB's eyes and then immediately punishing them the moment they make the throw. Because of this ability, he also had 7 total games against Power 4 competition last year where he had a receiver targeted 2 or fewer times. So teams not really throwing his direction and are trying to avoid it for the duration of the games that they have to face him, and understand so. He was a very, very productive corner last year.
Yeah, Cam Ward, the quarterback who I think perhaps epitomizes the my arm can make this throw kind of quarterback. And it's not just because of pure arm talent, though he does have a really good arm, but he was just so good at finding a way to, if there was any way to make a throw, he was capable of doing it. He threw to Jontez Williams' side of the field twice. I feel like that speaks for itself when the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft refuses to target a side of the field that someone is on.
Yeah, I think that does say quite a bit. Hopefully, we can just throw Jerron Tibbs or Jace Brown on them, and they go for 300 yards, and then we can make fun of them.
That'd be ideal, but he reminds me a lot of, Stradavius Hodges-Tomlinson, the TCU corner from a few years ago, where very, very, very good zone corner. They just don't have the complementary man. They don't have Josh Newton, which I think Josh Newton is still – it's weird that TCU has had 2 of the most underrated players in the Big 12 of the past, 5 years to me, being Andrew Coker, true freshman and sophomore Andrew Coker, and then Josh Newton. It's kind of weird that that's happened twice. But yeah, Jontez Williams is the part of the defense that worries me most because he's definitely the part of the defense that has the biggest potential to punish K-State, especially if they get over aggressive. So that leads us pretty well into the stories to watch and our personal predictions for the game. And we've hinted at this a few times, but the question is, how do both teams look given all of the circumstances around this game? Playing week 0, you get a week fewer of competition. You're playing a Power 4 conference opponent in week 0. You're playing in a completely different country, completely different offensive coordinator if you're Iowa State, losing a lot of returning production. So I'm just curious about how both teams end up looking in this game.
Yeah, I think that's a fair wonder because I think that there's a valid argument for both teams coming out really red hot and both teams also coming out maybe a little sloppy because there's going to be a lot of pressure, but it's a big occasion to rise to. I know that, Matt Campbell and Chris Kleiman, they're of like mind, like most coaches, and not wanting to overhype one game too much, but there's only so much you can do when it is the first game of the season, and it's a ranked matchup, and of course, it being in Ireland does make it a special occasion, whether you wanted to or not. So, for different players, it may mean different things, and it may have different impacts. But that's something to maybe keep an eye on. K-State is not spending as much time in Ireland as I thought they were going to, but not that it's a bad thing, but they're not really treating it like a bowl trip where you're kind of out there for like a week and really kind of taking in the surrounding area and getting a lot of extracurricular stuff. They're showing up, practicing a few times, playing the game, and leaving. That's basically it. They're going to do a couple things, I think, but that's it. But I am really curious to see how they come out because last year's game, Georgia Tech beat Florida State, and I think it would have been fair at the time to think that Florida State maybe just came out flat or put too much pressure on themselves. Obviously, we know how they ended up last year.
Yeah, they just sucked. But
yeah, they're just bad. So I'll be curious to see how both teams come out, because K-State, if nothing else, does have some experience starting the season in a neutral site away from home with the Stanford game. Granted, there's not many players on our roster right now that were there for the Stanford game. Taylor Portier would have been there. I think maybe Andrew Langgang might have been redshirting that year.
Stufflebean would have been there.
Yeah, Stufflebean would have been there. This would have been before VJ Payne, though. So not a lot of players on the roster left from that game. But those guys, they'd have a little experience. And K-State did look really fresh and ready to go in that Stanford game. Obviously, this is much different, but it's a potential comparison.
Yeah. And I also think that playing into this is both coaches kind of have a narrative about them. Regardless of the validity of the narrative, both coaches have sort of been known as slow starters. Now, I think that this was a point, I'm mostly regurgitating a point I think brought up by, I think it was either Cole Manbeck or Cole Carmody. It was one of the Coles on a Bosco's Boys episode where, I mean, Kleiman gets the reputation because of the Arkansas State game and losing to a Tulane team that ended up being exceptional. But Matt Campbell is actually generally a pretty slow starter, where he kind of does scrape by games at the beginning of the year, including up against North Dakota last year, where it kind of took them a little bit to get going. And that's kind of why, to show my hand a little bit, I kind of think that this game's going to be gross, because I think that it's both teams are just going to be so far out of their element that if this were a home game for K-State, I would pretty comfortably predict a K-State victory, and I'd feel so much better about what I have to say. But again, there are so many weird things going on with this game that it almost makes it a moot point. But we have to move on. And Connor, the next question is about a change in the coaching staff and the play calling for K-State.
Yeah. So coming up here, does Matt Wells shine in his play calling debut for K-State against a defense that was highly vaunted last year, and of course with defensive coordinator John Haycock, who we spent some time talking about, and he's really highly regarded as well.
Yeah, I think that this is more than just about any other offensive play calling debut for a K-State coordinator, which granted most of those have been bowl games. I think that this has the biggest one to establish a narrative very, very early on, because people outside of K-State already have narratives that they have subscribed to about Matt Wells due to his time at Texas Tech, whether they be fair narratives or not. But it really does depend on, can Matt Wells get those one-on-one situations, because I do think that K-State has the receiving talent finally to take advantage of those one-on-one situations. But it all depends on how flexible is Matt Wells willing to be. Are we going to see the more flexible Matt Wells that we saw at Utah State, or are we going to see the more stubborn screen pass focused Matt Wells that we saw at Texas Tech? I'm just curious to see. I think that he probably will get back more to the roots of being at Utah State because of who his quarterback was. I think people forget who his quarterbacks were at Texas Tech. But I'm just interested to see how he performs, because like it or not, fair or not, this is going to be the game that sets the tone for what people are going to think of a Matt Wells offense this year.
Yeah, I'm really not sure what to think here. I'm kind of leaning towards him having a good play calling game, though. I'm leaning towards the K-State offense having success in this game. I think this is going to be a game that sees more offense than last November's game did between these two teams. I'm expecting some pretty explosive plays from K-State as well. I think that there's a lot of weapons on this team, but it is going to be tough with I'm going against John Haycock on this Iowa State defense. There's still a lot of really talented players on this team for Iowa State, so it's not going to be an easy task.
No, not at all. And speaking of not making things an easy task, can K-State make Rocco Becht take that extra second to think in the pocket and bait him into mistakes? And I'll say that they were pretty good at doing that last year. They just couldn't capitalize on it.
Yeah, that's one of the tough, I think maybe the toughest question of the entire episode, and maybe leading into the game, because I think some of it's going to come down to the back end for K-State, because I do have a lot of faith in the pass rush to be able to get some pressure on Rocco Becht. But the question, I think, will remain, are the DBs ready? We know VJ Payne is good and he's geared up for a big season. Quay Moss has gotten a lot of love at the press conferences from the coaches. But Gunnar Maldonado, it's still kind of a up in the air deal on if he's going to play. And the corners, while we're high on them, like with Zayshawn Rich and Jaden Rowe, Donovan McIntosh, there's still a question as to if they're ready. Justice Clemens is the most seasoned of the group, but I think he's probably also the least talented of the group. But then he also, on the flip side, have to consider that this Iowa State team did lose a lot of weapons. They brought in transfers, but as we've seen here at K-State, that doesn't always mean that they're going to plug in and be great. So it's questionable at best. So I really don't know. I can't confidently give an answer on this one.
I will say on the point about Justice Clemens, he actually played very well last year. Like, he was keeping up with Jaden Higgins better than I think most people would remember, because that's kind of like one of the weirdest, oh, wait a minute, he was actually good kind of moments in that game. I will say last year they were not calling anything in terms of pass interference, and that was on both sides, because there were times that just straight up people were getting mugged and they did not throw the flag. It's hard to say either side was a beneficiary because both sides fell victim to it. But I think that Klanderman is more than capable of setting up bait for Rocco Becht, because he did do it last year. It's just a matter of capitalizing on it. Because if K-State capitalizes on 3 throws in particular last year that I'm thinking of, the one which should have been a pick to Des Purnell, one that should have been a pick to Justice Clemens, and then one batted ball that should have been caught by Austin Romaine, honestly, all 3 of those are probably pick sixes in K-State wins the game comfortably. It's just they develop stone hands. Oh, and there's a 4th where Siegel dropped one too, but that's not new. But they should have won the game last year because they did set those traps. They just didn't capitalize. So I think that they do capitalize on at least one of them this year. And if they capitalized on one of them last year, they probably win the game. So I do think that they do a better job with it in this game, because I think that they will remember, damn it, we almost had them on this.
Yeah, I'm hoping that for a lot of the returners that they still are going to have a sour taste in their mouth from the end of last year. So I hope that plays a role, and I hope that we're able to get one over Iowa State, because Kleinman has really struggled against Iowa State. We've only beat them, I think, in 2019 and 2022 since Kleinman started here. So this would only be his 3rd win over Iowa State. So I'd really like to get back on the right side of the win column against them.
Yeah. And the last one, I'll ask the question, even though I think I asked the previous one. I don't know. I don't have a very good memory for those things. Can Avery keep himself calm against a defense that is going to show their hands and try to get him to panic by showing blitz before the snap?
Yeah, that's something that I'm not really as worried about. I think Avery will stay calm this game. He's got a whole year of ups and downs under his belt at this point and a whole offseason to analyze it. I think a lot of times quarterbacks in year two, particularly quarterbacks as talented as Avery, take pretty big steps in their second year. And I think that pocket presence and being comfortable in the pocket, I think that's something that he'll be able to do. And I think he'll be able to stay calm this year and stand in and maybe take a handful of hits. But I'd like to think that he won't have to deal with that too much. With either having a good check down ready or just having good protection. But regardless, I'm looking forward to seeing Avery work this first game. I think he'll have something to prove, hopefully. So I'm not too worried about this point.
Yeah. Well, I'll put it this way. I don't think he's going to run backwards 25 yards and then get an intentional grounding for a safety. Don't think that's going to happen again.
I really hope it doesn't.
But in all seriousness, I think this is the game in the same way that it's going to establish narratives for Matt Wells. I think it's also going to establish narratives for Avery Johnson, because the difference between a great quarterback and a good quarterback is a great quarterback sees a blitz coming and says, oh, that's easy. There are a few guys in coverage. And a good quarterback or even a bad quarterback will go, oh, wait, I have less time to throw. It's a matter of perspective. So if Avery is able to keep himself calm and view it as, okay, here's my hot read, that's going to be open, I'll take my 5 or 6 yards. Or even if they're load blitzing or trying to overload one side of the line, rolling away from that, and that's going to put Avery Johnson on the national map again. And he's already been there. He's been there for a while, even though people have sort of gotten, I think people just kind of got fatigued of seeing Avery Johnson. It's like real-time prospect fatigue, where only fans are kind of immune to it. And even then, that's through rose-colored glasses. But I do think that Avery is going to keep himself calm. And that leads to the most important thing for me. It's not even a question. It's a key to victory, to steal from Bosco's boys. Whoever wins the cleaner game is going to win. And it sounds like oh yeah, duh. But no, seriously, whoever gets a turnover or whoever generates more turnovers is going to win this game. Because again, K-State was 3 plays away last year from probably blowing Iowa State out. And even if you take away, like, say that you don't have those plays where K-State turns them over, if you get rid of the first play of the game where it's a missed pitch, game goes completely differently, and I will stand by that. So whoever plays the cleaner game in a weird game is going to be the winner.
Yeah. For clean game, I think K-State probably does. I think Rocco Becht, I think he might struggle, honestly, in this game without Higgins and without Knoll. I think K-State is going to get a lot of pressure on him as well. We know that K-State has a lot of weapons there. So I'm really thinking that assuming that they don't just have a monstrous running performance, passing game isn't going to be what they need it to be. I think Avery's going to have a clean game as well. I already said I think he'll have something to prove against this Iowa State team because, he did have a pretty rough performance against them last year. He made some pretty big mistakes. Granted, there were other parts of the team that made some mistakes as well. There were some pretty bad drops near the end of the game. But I'm thinking that Avery's going to come out and want to start year 2 of starting with a bang.
I forgot to put it on the outline, but we do have to do offensive and defensive MVPs. I think our offensive MVP is going to be the exact same. It's going to be Avery Johnson.
Yeah, it's Avery.
But the defensive MVP, I think, is where it gets interesting. And honestly, I'm going to give it to Quay Moss as the nickel corner / field safety that they have listed on the depth chart, because I think that Rocco Becht is going to try and play this game like he does have those two receivers, and that's going to take advantage of one-on-ones or try to have a receiver that's just taller than someone and throw it up a little higher over the middle. And I think Quay Moss is more than capable of making that not happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'd love to see some Quay Moss and some robber coverage there over the middle. But I think that the MVP of this game might actually end up being Damian Olio. I think that we're going to need the defensive line to be strong on the run defense, particularly with Carson Hansen. I mean, we said it earlier, but like well over half of his yards last year were after contact. Nearly, it was 400 something.
485.
Yes, almost 500 yards after contact, and he had like 750 yards on the ground. So that's nearly 2/3 of his rushing yards were after contact. So Damian Olio, we're going to need him to be a force in the middle to help take him down, and we're also going to need him to help collapse the pocket on Rocco Becht and make him get to that second read and have that second thought to get him uncomfortable. So Damian Olio knows. I think that's my pick for defensive MVP.
Now we get into the most important part, which is the score prediction. And Connor, since I went first for offensive and defensive MVP, you get first for score prediction, how this game's going to go.
I'm going to say something different than I put on the outline because I checked my Bosco's Boys outline. I want to be consistent. It's only a slight change, but 38-24 K-State wins. I think this is going to be an offensive game, particularly for K-State. I think both teams having played each other recently, relatively speaking, I think they're going to come out with some offensive wrinkles, but I think K-State is just the by far more talented offense. And then while Iowa State does have a really good defense, they are going to have some replacements and some new pieces to kind of start to mold together. But I think that the balance of K-State returners and newcomers on offense is going to be it's going to outweigh, I think, Iowa State's balance. I think that Avery's going to have a big day. I think Jace is going to have a big day. I think Dylan and Joe Jackson are going to be both pretty solid. I think they're going to split a lot of the backfield duties. And I think Tibbs will be solid as well, and we'll see plenty of tight ends. But most importantly, maybe I think the offensive line is going to get off to a hot start this year.
I think this is a very rare you and I seeing a game going differently moment, because I view this as sort of a gross game where, but no matter who wins, no one's going to really feel great about how they won. They're just going to be happy that they did. I think that offenses are both going to have growing pains in ways that we've seen in the past for both sides. And I think that's just going to compound with the strange circumstances of the game. That being said, I agree with you in the fact that I think K-State's offense is just more talented than Iowa State. So I think talent ends up being the main differentiating factor here. And I think K-State ends up winning, 21-13. I think that's the same projection I made on Bosco's Boys, maybe one fewer touchdown for K-State. But it's a game that, because it's the first game of the year and we don't know how these teams are going to end up, you are getting into a lot of projection. But I do think that this game has the potential to kind of be gross for both sides. But in a weird way, I think that benefits K-State.
Yeah, and I see where you're coming from, because I think the most gross Farmageddon game in the Kleiman era was 2022, and K-State won that one 10-9. That was a disgusting game. K-State's only touchdown was a broken play on the very first possession of the game. But I think the offense is going to get it done this game for K-State. I think that Iowa State's defense is probably going to need a few weeks to really get settled. Because like you said earlier, the past few non-conference slates for Iowa State have not been great. So I think that we may see another slow start for them.
Yeah. Do you have any final notes before we sign off? Because I know you're very excited because you're actually going to be at the game.
I am. It's like still kind of not really hitting me that it is like less than a week until the game happens. Uh, it feels really strange, but I'm super excited. Um, I'm I think I'm mainly looking forward to seeing some of the um, defensive formations and some of the defensive rotations that we have. I'm curious on the back end, like how many of those names do we see? Like Mikey Bergeron and Jet Deneen made the depth chart for K-State in the safety room. So I guess I'll be interested to see if they play. Adonis Moise, he made it on the receiver side. So we're going to see any of him. Like I think that'd be really interesting because he, of the true freshman receivers, he was the one I wasn't as high on. I'm curious to see how much of that we see. Although I know this isn't a traditional game to start the year, where normally you're playing an FCS opponent and you're going to see some more depth make its way in the latter portions of the game. But I don't know. Regardless, I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm super excited to finally get this season started. I know it's going to hurt later though when we have 3 bye weeks this year. That is going to kind of be difficult to slog through, but we'll get through it.
Yeah. Plus, there are other things for you to be excited about. Just generally seeing Ireland. But
yeah, of course, yeah.
But with that being said, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville Alleycats. And if you want to email us, we're AggievilleAlleycats@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on a more personal note, I am at ACEdwards00.
I am at Connor Baltzor, capital C, capital D.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the official Aggieville Alleycats merch store found in our podcast and Twitter bio. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alleycats.